Hello all. I have just seen what I think is the wackiest, craziest, silliest video on YouTube that I've ever watched, in which a person alleges that the movie Snowpiercer, Bong Joon-ho's version of Snowpiercer, not the TV series, was a quote-unquote sequel to Willy Wonka and the Chocolate Factory, the Gene Wilder version. And he actually made some rather funny and somewhat compelling, but not really, arguments that that it was made to be a sequel. Obviously, it was done as a gag, but he actually said at the end of the video that he wanted Chris Evans to acknowledge that this was true, and apparently he did, which I think is great. He got like 1 million views. I don't think this is going to get 1 million views, but I thought I'd do something even better. I'm going to prove, using Joseph Campbell's 12 Steps of the Hero's Journey, that the Rocky Horror Picture Show is a sequel to The Wizard of Oz. And for those of you who aren't familiar, Joseph Campbell was a historian and a writer, and he came up with the idea that there are certain elements in every hero story that are the same. And he referred to those as the 12 steps of the hero's journey. And what those are, and I'll illustrate each one with an example. Initially, the hero starts out in the ordinary world. In this case, Dorothy starts out on the farm. Brad and Janet start out in Denton at their friend's wedding. Again, ordinary events. Then the hero receives a call to adventure. In the case of Dorothy, she meets Professor Marvel, who says he's going to have this wonderful circus and she should come. In Brad and Janet's case, they decide to go on the car trip to go see Dr. Scott. In the next step, the hero often refuses the call to adventure. Dorothy doesn't really want to go with Professor Marvel because she has to do her chores down on the farm. Brad and Janet kind of have their things to do too, and but they're going to go, eventually anyway. Then, in the next step, there are tests, and the hero meets. The next step is that the hero will meet a mentor who will sometimes give him either an amulet or an elixir or a magic sword or some sort of implement that he'll need on his or her quest. In Dorothy's case, she meets the good witch Glinda, who gives her the ruby slippers, and that's going to help her on her quest. There really isn't an equivalent scene in Rocky Horror. Brad and Janet aren't really given anything special that's going to help them. The next step is the hero faces a tests and meets enemies and allies. In the case of Dorothy, she meets the Munchkins. The test is they go through the ordeals that they go through where, she's hit by the apples from the apple tree, and they go down the yellow brick road with the Munchkins, and she meets the Tin Man, the Cowardly Lion, and the Scarecrow. In Brad and Janet's case, they go to Frankenfurter's castle, and they meet the Riff Raff and Magenta and Columbia and the Transylvanians. And they're made to sit through the time warp where Janet faints several times. Then there's the approach to the inmost cave. This is where the hero starts on his what's called the initiation phase. This is where the hero is sort of prepared for what's going to happen. In Dorothy's case, it's facing off against the Wicked Witch of the West and the flying monkeys, and going through the poppy fields and having these things happen to them. The Scarecrow is threatened, and everybody's and there's a lot of singing that goes on too, and that happens in Rocky too, where they enter the castle and they meet Frank, and again Janet faints, and he tells them what his agenda is, and they witness the creation of Rocky and the events that occur thereafter, and there's the whole thing with Meatloaf and as Eddie and what happens to him, and then and of course more great music, and then there's quote unquote the ordeal. In this case, in the case of Wizard of Oz, it's Dorothy meeting the great and powerful Oz, who tells her, you have to go defeat the Wicked Witch of the West by such and such a time, or you're never going to get home. And In Brad and Janet's case, it's, they're seduced by Frank, and, now they have to figure out what they're going to do, how they're going to proceed from this point. Then there's, quote unquote, the ordeal. There's the quest to destroy the Wicked Witch is Dorothy's ordeal. The floor show basically is the ordeal that Brad and Janet are put through. Then there's the hero receives a reward. In The Wizard of Oz, it's the rewards that are given out by the wizard to each of the people. The Tin Man gets a heart, the Scarecrow gets a brain, and the Cowardly Lion gets courage, or they receive symbols that mean those things. Dorothy doesn't initially receive a reward, but she'll get hers later because the wizard, who turns out to be a version of Professor Marlowe, is going to take her home. Then in the Rocky Horror Picture Show, the reward is basically that Brad, Janet, Rocky, and Columbia are freed from their sexual inhibitions, and they get to have this, the orgy in the swimming pool. Janet says she feels released, and Brad's still confused, and even, Dr. Scott receives some sort of a sexual liberation. Then there's the road home, and it's the balloon trip in The Wizard of Oz, and it's Riff Raff and Magenta returning the castle to the planet Transsexual in the galaxy of Transylvania in RHPS. Often this doesn't always happen, but in the hero story, there's something called the resurrection. In The Wizard of Oz, it's Dorothy wakes up back on the farm and realizes that the whole thing was just a dream, and she's still surrounded by everybody she loves. And in Rocky Horror, in some ways, it's the closing that the narrator gives about how mankind is lost in space and lost in time and meaning. Then sometimes, again, it doesn't always happen, but there's the quote-unquote the return of the elixir, or it's also known as the boon to society. The hero brings back something and helps heal a society or uses it to help society. There's really nothing like that in either of these films, although I would argue that the song Science Fiction Double Feature is sort of a wrap-up for the events of the Rocky Horror Picture Show. So that's an overall view of what each of the 12 steps of the hero's journey are and how they play out or don't play out sometimes in both of these films. What makes me think more that the RHPS is a sequel, quote-unquote, to The Wizard of Oz are, they're both kind of hallucinogenic, kind of weird trips where the hero is taken through this really strange maze of bizarre events, meets really bizarre things like, the horse is a different color, or the people in the city, the Emerald City, who are all kind of lazy, but they sing this, weird song and about how they're happy and they like to, play at doing nothing all day. And, in Rocky Horror Picture Show, the Transylvanians doing the time warp, and then, at the end, they all collapse. And Brad says this great line, "Say, you guys know how to Madison?" And, then, of course, there's, the whole hallucinogenic bit with Frankenfurter and his creation, Rocky, who is, quote unquote, almost his, bride of Frankenstein. And, the rivalry between Rocky and Eddie, who is ultimately taken out. And, in the Wizard of Oz, it's the Wicked Witch who's, finally destroyed. In RHPS, it's Frankenfurter who's destroyed by Riff Raff after, what seems like a whole movie of abusing him and whipping him and beating him. And finally, Riff Raff's had enough, and he receives a word from on high that he's now the new commander. And, he takes over and dispatches Columbia and Frank and Rocky ultimately. And I love the line when Magenta says, "You killed them, but I thought you liked them. They liked you." And he says, "They didn't like me. They never liked me." His little paranoid rant at the end. O'Brien was wonderful in that. There's no real equivalent to that in the Wizard of Oz, except that, Dorothy is somewhat disappointed to learn that she thinks the wizard can't take her home. But of course, in the end, he realizes that we realize that he is Professor Marvel from the original intro, and he still has the balloon that he had in that scene, and he's going to use that to take her home. We don't really, know if he's going to be successful until the final scene, where the resurrection, where she wakes up and she's still back on the farm. So maybe the whole thing was a trip, just a dream, or some kind of a weird hallucinogenic trip. And maybe that's the same for Janet, as they sing in Superheroes, that they're kind of freaked out, and they have to go on from this somehow. We don't know how. That answer is somewhat resolved in the quote-unquote sequel, Shock Treatment, but not really in a very satisfying way, I think. And that's no insult to O'Brien. I think Shock Treatment was a fairly decent movie, and I think it's been kind of somewhat maligned, even by me at a point. But he did the best he could, and I think it's worth watching. It is not great, but anyway, I'm not talking about that here. I'm talking about these two things. So I think, basically you can take any two movies and say, well, this is alike or that's alike. And I think the guy who did the Snowpiercer Willy Wonka thing was very creative. He did some great visuals, and he has some great, goofy, wacky ideas, like the assassin. It's really Mike TV grown up. And one of the other characters is really Veruca Salt, who's gotten nasty and, in her old age. And, makes a lot of really weird, claims, but they're not entirely without merit, though I think most of them are. So I hope you guys will like this. And again, this is just done for gags, but I think you can do this with anything. You can do it with the Maltese Falcon. You can do it with, It's a Wonderful Life is a version of the hero's journey. The hero's journey is done over and over again, both in books and on TV and in the movies. It's a winning formula because it involves us. Star Wars is another classic example. Luke starts out on Tatooine. He receives the call to adventure. He sees Obi-Wan's message. He's reluctant to go. He doesn't want to go with Obi-Wan to, into space. And it has all the things that are in the hero's journey if you look through it, every step. And again, Lucas was very conscious of that when he made the movie. So again, have fun and enjoy this. And I hope I get 1 million views. And if you want to, tweet Richard O'Brien and ask him to like it, like the other guy said, tweet Chris Pratt, please feel free to do it. And thank you, and like and subscribe.